have some exciting news to share. I wrote a book. I have been dreaming of being able to say this forever, for my entire life. And now I have finally done it. I finally completed my first draft of a novel. I put it in this beautiful light purplish binder because I just wanted it to look beautiful. And I thought about pulling all the pages out so I could hold them in my hands, but it was honestly a lot of work to get these all lined up, hole punch them, and get them all in this binder. So you can see the pages in here, they exist. I wrote a full novel. This has been a big part of my life this year, and it's been something that I just have not been talking about. It was something I was just doing for me, keeping very contained. I wasn't even really telling people in my life that I was doing this until it was done, because I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I have worked on this a long time, worked on different stories, and I just always find myself hitting these stopping points where I get like 25% in or 30% in or 35% in, and I just think my ideas are dumb, and then I stop and I never finish them. And so I just wanted to make this video to celebrate my accomplishments and to just talk about this experience a little bit in case you find it interesting. We're all readers here. You might find this part of the process interesting too. I've prepared no thoughts for this video, so I'm just gonna kind of ramble and tell you about my experience, why I decided to write a book, how I finally got my first draft finished for the first time, and what I plan to do with this story next. So I guess first I'll tell you a little bit of my history and how I wanted to write a book. I feel like it's not the most surprising thing when people love reading this much that they want to write a book. People often assume you want to write a book. People have asked me that a lot, who know I read a lot, who, you know, come to my house and see my bookshelves. Is that something you ever want to do? And for me, the answer has always been an obvious yes, because I actually have an entire degree in creative writing. That's what I went to college for. That is what I have always done. And this has always been a goal of mine. I remember even being a kid in elementary school, and me and my friend would write stories together, and we'd work on the story together and the illustrations together. And we had this whole story about this like bunny, the super bunny who like jumped off cliffs and had all these adventures. Like this has just always been something that I love to do. I love stories, I love storytelling, I love being on both sides of the experience. But I feel like there's this fairy tale story that's told about authors a lot, or, you know, from the perspective of authors who are like, I have to write, I have to get these stories out of me. This is what fuels me. I can't imagine a life where I don't write. If I'm not writing, I'm not having a good day. I was born to write. These stories flow out of me. My characters are making all these choices. It's just pouring out of me. And that is not always the experience that I've had with writing. And I think having a different experience from that can make you feel like maybe you're not meant for that path. Maybe you're not actually a writer. It can make you doubt yourself a lot. Like, oh, it doesn't feel like this magical, beautiful thing to me all the time. I don't always have this inspiration just coming to me. I don't feel so connected to the muse at all moments. And if you're not having that super artistic, you know, passionate experience with it, it can really make you question, maybe this isn't the path for me. Maybe it is supposed to be really easy, and maybe it's supposed to be really natural. But the reality is, writing can be a lot of hard work, especially when you're working on a full-length novel. Creating and developing a story from start to finish, building a world, building characters, building a story that's hitting all the different plot beats and taking a character from point A to point B, but giving them a really interesting journey along the way, that is very difficult work. It is very difficult to do. It is difficult to stay motivated. It is difficult to find the time to do it. It is difficult to sit down in front of your computer and watch your words coming on the screen and doubting yourself if this is even good at all, if there's any point to doing any of this, if it's even going anywhere. It's difficult to get halfway through your story and then realize you would rather do something completely differently and not knowing if you should go back to the beginning or just keep going, especially when you have a full-time job. I have a full-time job. I do this, you know, on the side for booktube. I'm reading all the time and trying to keep up reading. There's a lot of stuff in my life going on. So to find time to also sit down and write can be challenging, especially when it doesn't feel like this beautiful experience every single day. There were plenty of times when I'd sit down to write this story in particular that felt really easy. There were certain moments in the book that I was really excited to write. There were certain times when I was just really in the mood to write. But there were also plenty of days where I was tired and I didn't want to, and I'd had a busy day. I wasn't feeling as inspired with the part of the story I was in. I was questioning myself, and there wasn't motivation. I had to create my own motivation with my own sense of discipline and rigor and just putting words to the page, because that's just what it takes. Every word that you write is another step of the way to getting yourself closer to the finish line. It's like reading a book, you know, every page you read, you're getting closer to the end. So I just had to keep going through and keep pushing myself to do that. I think the reason I was able to finish this first draft and why I haven't finished so many others, because like I said, I studied creative writing in college. The way that program worked, you were writing short stories all the time. So every week you were turning a new short story. Sometimes they were 500 words, sometimes 1,000, sometimes longer. And every week you were taking that to your workshop and you were reading everyone else's stories and critiquing their stories. You were getting your story critiqued. We'd have different prompts of, you know, the types of stories we were writing. Sometimes the prompts were as ridiculous as like our professor just thinking of a random phrase that they wanted us to put in the story, like alligator eggs, I think was something I had to do one time. And it was like, write a whole story and like somehow find a way to do this. Sometimes the prompts were, you know, go sit in a park and watch people and make a story out of something you see. Sometimes it was we'd read a different short story or an excerpt from something and we were trying to replicate a certain element of that. It was just all kinds of different things. That process burnt me out so bad because it was just constant churn and burn of bad stuff. Like you can't write a great short story in just 1 week and take it to critique and then you're not doing anything with it. You're not improving it from there. It's just like short story, get it critiqued, move on to the next thing, which I think is a good practice for, you know, you have to just like do that. It's this repeatable process to get used to it. You also then like learn how to take a lot of critique face on. You learn a lot of rejection. You exercise the demons inside of you of just having to let your stuff be bad sometimes and just getting over that and accepting that everything you write is not going to be great, and especially not the first draft that you put on a page. It's not going to be great, and especially if you don't have time to really work on the craft of that, it's not going to be great. So leaving college, I finished with a ton of short stories, and some of those I had gone through and done revisions on and gotten a chance to do that when you're preparing your portfolio at the end of the year. But I had a ton of material that I came out of college with. But I was never working on a novel when I was actually in that program. There were classes and certain seminars where we'd be in with MFA students, or an MFA student would be my professor. And people who are doing an MFA, it's usually a 2-year master's program where you're working on a novel the whole time. And so we'd read some of their stuff and help critique their stuff at a time, but their whole program is dedicated to like, you're working on this book the whole time. Whereas for us, it's like these short stories that you're just churning and burning. And so there were times where I considered, do I get an MFA? Like, will that give me the time to sit down and actually write a full-length novel? Is that the kind of program I want? And for many reasons, I just decided that was not the path I wanted to take, at least in that point in my life. Is it something I'll ever do? I don't know, maybe, you never know what's gonna happen, but that was just not something that made sense for me at the time. Instead, I ended up going into a corporate career. I ended up working in the marketing field. My work is creative in some ways, but also quite technical in others. And I just ended up on this different path than I thought it was gonna be for myself. I didn't have like a clear vision in mind, but going into my 20s, I knew I wanted to have a career where I could have job security and financial security. Those are the things that were two most important to me. I've also always kind of been a pretty equally left brain and right brain type of person. I really like analytics and spreadsheets, as you guys know. And so I just ended up finding a career that actually worked really well for me, where I got to balance both of those things, both of those sides of my brain, challenge myself. I started as a writer, and then I got really interested in the performance analytics side of digital content and got really into SEO and then into all the technical things behind the curtain of a website. So I just ended up taking this path that, you know, I didn't necessarily choose for myself. It was just like I was always doing the next thing that made sense for me, and that's how I ended up down this path, finishing school, super burnt out, entering into my career, and I just did not write for a very long time. Instead, I ended up reading a lot, and that's what brought me on this journey here, where I ended up doing a YouTube channel. I ended up spending a lot of time doing this, which I think was actually something that made a lot of sense for also balancing that side of analytics and performance and like challenging myself to see how can I grow my YouTube channel? How can I learn more about the algorithm and the audience and the type of content to make and how to edit the content and how to market the content with the thumbnail and the headline. And it just naturally became a path that made a lot of sense for me, took up a lot of my time. And it wasn't until 4 years ago maybe that I did finally start writing again. And I always knew I wanted to do a novel. So while I had all this experience with short stories, I was like, no, I'm ready to do the novel. This is what I want to do. That also coincided, good timing, with me moving away, moving out of state, not having a lot going on in my life, working remotely, not knowing a lot of people where I was. It was just like writing's a more introspective, private, personal thing, and that meshed with the timing of that pretty well, that I had the opportunity to start finding time to do that again. And for the course of the last couple of years, there have been many times where I have started novels and I just trash them. I just hate them. I don't think they're good once I get going on them. I start with this idea that I feel really excited about, and once I get going on it, I'm like, this is the dumbest thing. No one will want to read this. Why am I doing this? And I trapped myself in that hole for a long time. So much so to the point where I stopped writing again. I just convinced myself like, this isn't it for me. Maybe I'm not, you know, experiencing this moment that so many people seem to have with their artwork, and just maybe this isn't the path for me. Maybe instead I should just continue to focus on this YouTube channel and the reading side of things, and maybe I'm not a creator, maybe I'm more of a critic and a consumer, and is there space for both? And I don't know, just getting myself in a lot of self-doubt. Throughout this whole time though, I've always known this is something I want to do. And I guess I just accepted that I'm still young and life can be long and you don't have to do everything, you know, right now. There's no rush, there's no deadline. Maybe this is something you'll do when you're 50 or 60. You know, there's so much time to do the things that you want to do in life if you get the good fortune of getting to live a long life. So it was never like fully gone away. It was just, I stopped putting the pressure on myself, I guess. I was like, you don't have to force something out of you if it's not going to come. If the time's not right, time's not right. That's fine, move on. And then a series of things happened in my life. Last fall, I just went through a really rough couple of months for a period of time. I talked about it a little bit on the channel at the time and said like I was not going through a great time and I was, you know, doing a little bit less content. I was a little less inspired and energized to do things. Part of it was medical stuff, part of it was mental health stuff, part of it was life stuff. And I didn't know like what was the cause and effect, or were all these things just happening at once? Was I just experiencing my Saturn return and it was like this greater astrological thing? I still, you know, don't really know, but I did get past that. I got in a better headspace. And then early this year, I ended up losing someone in my family, one of my closest family members, my grandfather, and he had gone through this really terrible experience the last couple of years of his life, just dealing with dementia and seeing how that affected him and seeing how that affected my family, and then all the stuff that had kind of happened the fall before. I feel like I just started thinking about life a lot differently. I feel like my brain chemistry has changed in certain ways. It sent me into existential crisis in certain ways. It's made me think about my life a lot differently, the things I value a lot differently. It's difficult to explain unless you've experienced too, where it just feels like there's a you before these things happen and then there's a you after, and you just feel like you've entered this new brain that you've unlocked where you're just thinking about things a lot differently. And there wasn't necessarily a moment in time where all of that led to me being like, okay, I'm gonna start writing this book. I guess there probably was. There was a day that an idea struck and I wrote it down for the first time and I started putting the first word on the page. And I know when that was in May is when I started doing that, because I remember when I started, I was like, I want to see, you know, if I do finish this, how long does it take me? So I started May 8th was the first day that I opened a document and started putting some words down. And I don't want to sound contradictory to my beginning statement where it feels like art has to be this magical thing, but there is a bit of magic in it, you know, like where these stories come from, all this experience of how my life changed, how my thoughts changed, how my experience of the world changed, just had me thinking about all of these things a lot differently. And I think I just needed a space to process that in some way. I think it was a mix of the timing being right, me being mentally in a space to explore something and feeling like there was something I needed to work through, and just being ready to actually finish the project for the first time. So I do want to share some of the things for how I actually got through a first draft for the first time as someone who started so many times and threw so many things away. I feel like there's so many things I learned along the way that I've metabolized over the years that finally just clicked in my brain and finally allowed me to just write the story. So I've read several writing books in my life, both through my program and on my own time. I've read Stephen King's On Writing. I've read Save the Cat for story structure. I've read more technical books on writing. I've done master classes over the years from others authors. I've absorbed a lot of material, like what has worked for people. And I think there's only going to be one thing that's going to work for you. And you just have to get exposure to all of these different things. So you have all these different concepts, these tools to put in your toolkit of ways to think about it. And then certain things will resonate with you and be your own personal experience. And what's resonated for me over that time is stuff that I thought I understood earlier too, but I didn't fully accept it until now. One of those things is to write like you are only writing for yourself. You're not writing a book thinking about who's going to read this and what's the audience and how they receive it, especially when you're writing your first full-length novel. Maybe that's something you think about differently if you're an established author, if you have a career doing this. But to be able to get past all of the moments of self-doubt and criticism and cringe and this is stupid, you have to just be doing it for you and truly tell yourself, nobody will read this. You can just write whatever you need to write. If you need to write the most simple sentence you've ever written or seen written ever just to get to the next scene, do it. You know, just keep the story going. Also, something I've never been able to do before until this draft is anytime I'd reach one of those moments, I always felt the need to start back over, and I would just get in the cycle of rewriting my first couple of chapters over and over and over and over again every time I had a different idea, and I could never get through the full story. With this one, I did plot the entire story before writing it. I had an idea of every beat that I wanted to hit, the high level of what each chapter was going to be. I had it in this like 27 chapter framework of all of the moments going through the arc of the story. But there were still things that changed once you actually get in and start writing every word of those. There's certain things where you're like, oh, maybe this character is not as impactful and they don't need to exist. Maybe this character actually needs to function in a different way in the story. Maybe this character needs to make a different choice. Or you go to write something that you thought would have made sense, and then as you're doing it, you're like, my character would never do this. Now that I know my character better, this doesn't actually make sense for them. I allowed myself to just push through those moments. I would make a little note and say, this thing needs to change, keep writing. And know that when you go back, before you get to chapter 5, that character doesn't need to be in the story anymore. When you rewrite it, eventually you'll remove that, and that's fine. Just act like this is going on now. And that was huge for being able to get me through those moments of just like, don't go back, don't look back, write some stuff, keep moving. I will say in the very beginning, I had this one element of the story that ended up being pretty important that I needed to change. And so I did rewrite a little bit in the very beginning, but just so that I could understand how that changed the story, I didn't go back and like fully rewrite beautiful prose to do that. I was just like, okay, this has to happen, then this has to happen, then this has to happen. Okay, now I can go and write the rest of the story. And that's the only time I did that. So I know that this story, if you open this and you read this, it's not good. Like, it's okay. You know, I feel good about, there's a story here. It hits the arcs, it hits the beats. There's characters, they make sense. Some moments of dialogue I think are super great. Some moments I really tapped in and felt like I had something good going, but there's plenty of stuff in here that is just draft one. The story had to come out. You don't know your story until you tell it to yourself for the first time. And when you get through it the first time, then you can look back and realize you wanted to do things differently. This needed to change. This doesn't make as much sense. This isn't the story you want to tell in this particular element. You want to shape it a little bit differently. The ending is like this now, but really it'd be more impactful if it went in a different direction. And editing is so much easier than writing the story for the first time. Having a material to look at gives you the basis to be able to see what's working, what's not working. And I had heard that so many times in different ways. People had given that advice in so many different formats and saying in their own different ways. And it wasn't until this year that I was like, yep, okay, that clicks in my brain. That makes sense to me. So if you're someone who wants to write, if you're running into these similar things, if you feel like you're resonating with these things that I say, if there's similar experiences that you've had, I hope that you can take some nugget from this and something will resonate with you and help unlock something in you. I would say the biggest things for me is just like really reducing pressure on myself. When I finally allowed myself to say, you don't have to write an amazing book in your first draft. It doesn't even have to make sense all the way. No one's gonna be reading this. This is just for you to edit off of. This is just to have your foundation. You just need to tell the story to yourself. And also just the higher level pressure reduction of like, you don't even have to do this year if you don't want to. You don't have to do it for 10 more years if you don't want to. That really gave me the space to be creative and to relax and to finally accomplish this goal that I'd wanted to do. I do feel like a question that is inevitable that I will receive, because I have started telling people in my real life this now, like, oh my gosh, I just finished my book. I just finished it right at the end of October. So I've been off of it for a couple weeks, stepping back of it, but that was May, June, July, August, September, October. So 6 months. I wrote my first draft in 6 months, which I think is pretty good. I was pretty proud of that. But the question everyone wants to know is, what is your book about? And I am not sharing those very specific details at this point in time, but I will tell you high level, it is a speculative novel, And maybe not a surprise if you listen to what brought me here, but it is a story about grief and moving through grief. If you're familiar with the types of books I like to read, I obviously mostly read mystery, thriller, and horror. I've been reading less horror this year though. But another big portion of my reading is these speculative stories where people get these weird opportunities to do things where their life has this magical element to them and it makes you reflect on life and process and whatnot. The story I wrote fits in that bucket of stories, which is not always what I thought I would do. I always thought I would write a thriller, but I've fallen out of love with thrillers in the last year, and this is just what aligned in the stars for me. As for what's next with my story, I am, like I said, I took a couple weeks off of it because I've always heard it's good to just give yourself some distance from the first draft before you go back into it. I've heard people say like 6 weeks is usually a pretty good time frame before you jump back into it and then read it for the first time all the way through and then start figuring out how you want to edit it. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm taking a little cooling off period from it. I miss it so much. Like every day I'm like, oh, I just want to go back. I just want to read it. I just want to finally read the whole thing. And I'm having all these ideas for things I want to change, but I'm like, just take a break from it, step away, allow yourself to forget the story a little bit so you can look at it with a, fresher pair of eyes. So I'm trying to be patient, but then I do plan to read through the whole thing. And ideally, I would love to get this in a much better place, go through a couple rounds of edits, do some developmental edits where I'm just changing larger structure things, and then go through and do some more line level editing and work on prose and dialogue and atmosphere and tone and all of those things. So I do plan to go through the story however many more times it takes to make that happen and get it in a more polished space. I have always had this dream of seeing my book on a bookshelf in stores one day. I don't know if I will ever want to try to publish this book though, or if I'll just let it be my first novel and just have it to myself. But I feel like I can do it now. I feel like I've gotten this big confidence boost in myself. I'm feeling so proud of myself. I'm so happy with the result of it too, and just the feeling of creating something start to finish. I wasn't sure if I'd reached this point where I finished it and then I was like, oh, I did it, okay, that's it, just put it in a box, accomplish the goal, don't feel like that's something I need to do anymore. That's not how I feel, at least right now. So this is something where I'm like, great, now I have these other ideas, now I know how to execute them, but I want to spend more energy on this one. I want to get it in a better place. I want to practice my way through it a couple more times, and maybe I'll want to try to get it published at one point. If you know anything about the publishing world, the traditional publishing world at least, it's a huge process of having to query your novel to get an agent, and then that is a shot in the dark if you ever get an agent in the first place. But even if you do get an agent, then your agent works with you on the book and editing the book, and then your agent's the one who takes it to submission to publishing houses, and they can be on submission for years and you can never hear anything. It's so hard to even get the book published from there. So there's so many, parts of the process, so much red tape. It's not just like, oh, you wrote a book and then you send your first draft to someone and they make it better and then boom, it gets published. It's like this huge thing where you really gotta fix your story yourself and get it in the best possible shape before you even start looking for an agent. So that's something in the back of my mind that I might want to do. It's not something I'm putting a ton of pressure on myself for. It's just an option that I have available to me that I might pursue at one point. And that's kind of where I'm at for now. I do have some more thoughts on a follow-up to this video I could maybe do, because there's been so much from this experience of writing a novel start to finish that has completely changed my experience with reading. I honestly can't believe how much I was still reading in May, June, July, and August while I was working through writing this novel. Once I got closer to the end, that's why my reading has sucked lately. That's why I did not read much in September or October. I'm barely reading anything in November, is because I was so focused on finishing this novel. And all of these things with how my experience with reading has changed since I started writing has made reading honestly a little bit less enjoyable for me lately. And it's difficult to do both in a large amount at the same time and keep up enjoyment levels on both. But I thought I would talk about some of that in this video, but I feel like I've been rambling for a while. So anyway, if you would be interested in hearing some about how this process has changed my experience with my reading, and just it's been surprising in ways I wasn't expecting. So if you want to hear about that, I could do a follow-up video if you're interested. I don't expect to be giving any more specific details about my story in the foreseeable future. I really just wanted to share this because it's been such a huge part of my year. I feel like it kind of explains some of how my channel has maybe changed in the past couple of months in some ways. And it's just an accomplishment that I'm really proud of. And I had this vision in my mind of always being able to say, I wrote a book, and this really just puts a nice pin on that. It's nice to celebrate yourself and your accomplishments, and I wanted to celebrate this accomplishment of mine. And I hope you found this video interesting in some capacity. If this is something that you have as a goal for yourself to, just know you can definitely do it. Reduce the pressure on yourself. Everyone's experience is going to be different. Even if I can just help you by saying like, it's not this beautiful magical experience every single day, and that can help reduce the pressure on you, I hope that has helped you in some way. And I'm just so happy to finally have this in my hands. If there's anything else you have questions on, anything else you'd like to hear about that is not the specific details of my story, which I will not be sharing, let me know down in the comments below, and I can definitely continue this as a series in some capacity. If that's something you're interested in, just let me know. But that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you on my next one. Bye.